And I'm reminded about 2 or so years ago when we began the process of starting the outlet community.
If you call it a process.
It was a process to me.
It was a process we had no idea about.
And so, I found myself in life sitting at a fork in the road. Do
Yeah.
I continue in the career or what I called a calling of
Yeah.
ministry, or was it time to pursue a different avenue and a different way of living life and working and just doing what I believe God put in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, there was I would say a Tuesday. I'll never forget the day we were in Orlando, Florida, helping my mother move, and the Lord said, "Vince, I want you to promise to me that you won't tell me no." And so I'm sitting there when he's asking me that, thinking, I don't have anything else to do. I'm kind of at a fork in the road. I need to figure out, what's next for our life and our family. And so I made a commitment to him at lunch on that Tuesday that, God, I'm not going to tell you no.
Amen.
And later in that afternoon, we had a dear lifelong friend who reached out to us and said, God really put you on my heart, and I want you to pray about if you're to open a church. And how in your head you're like, I don't know, but in your heart you're like, I have peace about exploring what that church is like.
Yeah.
And so later on that night, I just heard the Lord say, it's time. And so I told him I wouldn't say no. So I said, I believe the Lord put in my heart to open a church. And probably in the next 5 days, we had everything that we needed, from official documents, official paperwork, to begin the church. Now, one thing that you really need that's important is a name.
Yes.
And one thing I saw myself doing my entire life, so my will, was that I was going to go around helping organizations, helping leaders be all that God has called them to be. I saw myself helping churches do what God has placed them in the earth and in their communities to do. I saw myself just kind of doing that on the side. I figured I'd have a primary job, and then whenever I had some free time, I would be able to sow into other organizations. And so we originally called that, because it began to take off, we originally called that the Outlet Consulting. So I didn't necessarily have a church name. I didn't have kind of it all mapped out and everything.
No.
But in my heart, the Lord said, I want you to take the Outlet Consulting, and I want you to make the Outlet now a church. There's a ministry here locally that I love how they pattern their ministries, where the name of the church doesn't let you know who the pastor is, because the church is about helping the community.
Right.
And so God put in our heart that the Outlet was supposed to be a church that was committed to their community. And so that's how we came up with the Outlet Community Church. And so we went in a matter of 5 days from not even thinking about having a church to now having a church with a name, legally established, and
that was the whole process,
and nowhere to go.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. So, I want to walk you through where we were. We were in a season of the unknown, but we knew God was with us, and anytime the Lord gives you vision, there's always going to be provision for you, right? Yeah. And so we didn't have much to start with. We really didn't have
anything.
Amen.
So while we're doing all of this, I always joke and say, pastoring for me is like that phrase, I didn't choose thug life chose me. Well, I didn't choose the pastor life. The pastor life kind of chose us.
It did.
So while we're kind of just, if you can imagine, the Outlet is kind of like this thing on the side. Our focal point is, I'm applying for jobs.
Yes.
I'm going into arenas because I'm finishing my master's degree, so I'm going into areas where I'm like, okay, I'm qualified, I have the education, I can go into these different things. And it was like all on the what I thought was the side. God was putting together Outlet, because we had nothing toward it.
And so we have wonderful overseers, and we have one couple in particular. They decided to be a blessing to us, and what they did not know, and what we found out was, when you submit paperwork, there's a fee.
Yeah.
And so
To the iris.
yes, and so
Ooh,
we
the
learned
iris,
this
Lord.
was all a learning process. And so that couple called us and they wrote us a check. And would y'all know that the check was for the exact amount that fee was to file our paperwork with the state?
So we're sitting here with my lifelong friend who's
Yeah.
handed us all the paperwork that we
paperwork.
need. The Lord dropped a name in our heart, and then someone walks up to us and say the Lord spoke to them and says, we want to sow this money into your whatever you're doing next. And it was what we needed.
The exact amount.
It was the exact amount. So for us, it was a signpost like, okay, Lord, you're providing through this update your support. So let's begin to cooperate with it. But naturally, I'm still in my will. I'm still trying to apply for jobs. And there was one job that I had that I thought was perfect, and I was a shoe-in for it. I had connections. I didn't get that job. And but with the outlet just began to just get larger and larger and larger.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the next week. I'm like, well, if, we receive the resources, we have the paperwork, the least we can do is go look for a place to explore this idea of having a church, because maybe we might be able to launch by August or something of 2018. And as we were going around, place after place after
Yeah.
place was that I said we need to look at
Oh, yeah.
was not available. In my heart the whole time, the Lord said, I want you to go to King Middle School. And I was like, I ain't going to King Middle School. I'm not doing that. But me being hard-headed and thinking that I had the best way, I went and looked at all these different other places, which were not King. And I can remember finally my way being broken down and getting a meeting set up at King Middle School. Shout out to all the teachers, administrators who helped us to get a meeting there. And I'm going to meet with the decision makers at King about holding a church service for, number one, a church that doesn't exist, and number two, we don't know how this is going to go. And so I can remember setting the meeting up with Principal Paul Brown. And
He's amazing.
He just was a godsend on that day. And I remember getting ready to give him my 30-second pitch of, this is what I believe this church that God has given me is called to do. And before I could open my mouth and say anything, he says, you don't need to tell me any of that. I see God with you. Whatever you need, we're going to be here to help. And it was just another sign of, okay, God, you're with us in establishing this work. So now you're talking about paperwork we didn't ask for,
Right.
the funds to
The
file
funds to do it.
with the government, and a building. And this is before Easter.
Yeah.
So we had a dear friend who who works on a very popular Christian radio station, and one of our very first supporters, who said, listen, we're doing a special broadcast for Easter this year, and they asked for our pastors, and you're my pastor, so I want you to be one of the speakers in 7 and 7. And so I'm like, okay. Again, the Lord said, don't tell me no. So I'm like, okay, yes, I'll do it. So I am on a schedule with some major speakers, not just in the metro Atlanta area, but in the world, in all Christendom. And so I go in, I do my part, I leave out, I go home, I get a call, and the producer says, Vince, we kind of made a mistake. We know we had you on Thursday before Good Friday, but we gave John Gray the Thursday. We need you to come and record in John Gray's spot on Good Friday. So I'm like, Lord, what in the world do you have me into right now? And I remember going to record, and Willie Moore Jr. asked me a question at the end of recording my last 7 sayings of Jesus. He said, so Pastor, I want you to tell all of our listeners, all of our millions of listeners, what are your plans for Easter this year? Y'all, I ain't got no church. I ain't got no building.
We didn't have no plans.
I ain't had nothing. So I'm sitting over here asking me, and I'm asking God, like, what am I going to do? He said, I want you to go outside in the park at Grant Park and hold Easter. Just have a gathering. Just come together on Easter. And so, with my mouth on the radio.
Radio.
I invited
How many people tuned in? With estimated.
at least 2.5 million people.
Wonderful.
And I'm saying, won't you join me in my imaginary church
And park.
in the park, outdoors, on Easter? And y'all, I ain't think anybody was going to show up. Like, honest to goodness, we just were obeying what God was asking us to do.
Yes, and I will say obedience doesn't require much.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times we think we have to have our ducks perfectly in a row to obey God, but that's not what God is saying to many of us, and especially during this time. If your company is doing things, but God's trying to do something innovative in you, and we need to just be obedient to what He's saying and watch Him work that thing out to where it's going to turn around for your good.
So we had that outdoor service.
We did.
On Easter. I want to say
outside. We were the praise and worship team.
And I was immediately sat down after that day.
We sang "Here I Am to Worship" a cappella.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
Ish. Beautiful-ish.
To the Lord.
He saw it. and from there we held just meetings because we're like, okay, well, God, you've given us everything that we needed,
Yeah.
or we were told that we needed to start a church.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna obey his rhythm, and we're gonna obey his pace. And we had a couple of open houses for a couple weeks after that, but we launched officially on May 6th, 2018. And we share that story to show you that this ministry that you all see really started as a result of God speaking and saying, I want to do something new. I want to do something innovative. And so from the very beginning, He has modeled this ministry after the early church.